Hey guys, welcome to the Independence Day week. We won't have a Foresight TV this week because it's the holiday. Today I've got my good friend Scott Collins with me. We're going to be talking about tech and launching new companies and how to tell your stories, all sorts of amazing things. I'm really excited about this conversation. We had a chance to catch up after quite a while at the Mary Furlong Conference, Longevity Summit. I don't know if I can get the right name right, but anyway, Mary Furlong's event in Berkeley a couple of weeks ago. But we'll get into this in just a minute. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Scott, welcome. Let's start with who you are and what you do, and then we'll dig into some, we'll get into the middle of conversation.
Steve, thanks so much for having me on today. It's always good to be with you. And so my name is Scott Collins, CEO of the Linkage Group. We've been around since the mid-90s, got started by a group of senior living providers, initially to focus on managed care. Then we moved into group purchasing, market research, partnered with Ziegler on 3 venture funds to put capital into early stage companies with products, services, and technology geared towards older adults and the providers who serve them. And then most recently, we created our own venture studio called Linkage Launch, which is really taking a problem-first approach to identifying jobs to be done, problems to be solved, leveraging our domain expertise and our network of providers, not just in senior living, but across the continuum, including payers and policymakers, to start building companies ourselves and do it in a way that we think is unique and differentiated. So I've been doing this a long time and look forward to chatting with you today.
Great. Well, I want to dig a little bit more into this venture studio thing. It was a term I'd never heard until we met in the Bay Area. And I suspect that it's something that a lot of people would be interested in understanding what it is and maybe even want to participate in. But first, I'd actually like to just sort of have your overview of how you see aging technology right now. And I'll sort of set the stage a little bit. When I first started going to Mary's events, they were quite a bit smaller. They were on the campus of Santa Clara University. I saw a lot of technology that was super unimpressive. Rarely actually saw stuff that was I thought, that's really cool. This time, much better. It seems like the approaches are better. And yet I've had some conversations with some people who are trying to innovate. I actually had 2 yesterday. One's pretty interesting and one was just completely clueless. So how do you see this whole aging technology thing?
You know, Steve, it's really evolved over the years from when you and I first met. I don't even know when that was. And to your point, in the early days, I think there was still a lot of fumbling around in the dark, so to speak, to develop what people thought older adults would consume. Since that time, I think there's been probably a better understanding of what works, what doesn't. I've seen more accomplished companies coming into our space with products, technology, especially in services, that seem to resonate more and have done a better job, I think, scaling. So we're seeing businesses that I think at least have a much more reasonable chance for success than we certainly did in those early days.
And do you think do you think they're just better educated, or they're getting better advice? Because almost everyone I talk to has a story that starts with, well, my grandmother, right? Yeah. And yet it does seem better.
It really does. I think there's a few things driving it. When we first started investing in this space back in 2014, there weren't very many focused in the, I'll call it, age tech space. And since that time, I think you've seen more investment firms coming into this market, really wanting to figure out how to back tech businesses that they think are going to be able to scale and penetrate new markets for them. So I think that's really helped elevate the quality of technology that we're starting to see. I also think that providers have done a better job of understanding sort of what type of infrastructure they need to have in place in order to utilize a number of these different tech solutions. Because in the early days, they would see something interesting, but come to realize they didn't have the, the high-speed internet access or other infrastructure necessities to be able to scale these out within their communities. And then finally, I think Mary Furlong, you, others have done a much better job, I think, educating the entrepreneur community about how to take a minute and really understand if there is a bigger problem to be solved and an addressable market beyond, I wish I had this when my grandmother had that.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about two things. One of these I probably should have talked about before we got on air, but I'm going to try it anyway here, and you can figure out how much of it you want to address or not. So we have seen in the last year, this is that place where we normally use private chat, but here we are. Anyway, over the last, I would say 18 months, we have seen a number of technology companies in the senior living space get big rounds of funding. Some of them, and frankly, even sort of made my head spin. And the thing I wonder about, and I may be completely wrong about this, you might have much more expertise, but if a company in the senior living space comes in and dominates the market, makes a good profit, and then they sell out sounds like the wrong word, right? But they do a big round of funding. I find myself wondering if these investors are expecting continued growth when in fact they've actually mostly tapped out the marketplace.
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. I think what many investors fail to grasp completely is that if we're looking at health tech as a broad investment theme, the age tech market that you would normally see distributed through some sort of provider network is significantly smaller. And so to your point, when you've got those companies that have scaled significantly within the senior living and care market, let's say, you're right, there's not a huge amount of upside left in the market. And so I too have scratched my head a little bit on some of the valuations that we've seen. We certainly take a much more conservative approach in valuing the assets in our portfolio. And you've also seen, I think, that translate into things having cooled down a little bit in terms of big investors coming into this space versus what you saw probably 2 or 3 years ago. So capital is still, I think, constrained a bit on the sideline, waiting for the right opportunities. But certainly some valuations that we saw 3 or 4 years ago, those have failed to materialize, I think, to the degree those investors would have hoped.
Yeah, and I want to say, in fairness, I don't really have any. I'm somebody who's on the outside looking in, and so they may have a growth plan. I'm sure that they have at least something, but they may have a growth plan for new products to be able to enhance revenue. And so I hope I'm wrong about it, because I think success with these technology companies is good for everybody. One of the things.
Can I just build on that point just for 1 second? Because I think it can be both. There are some technologies that are built specifically for the senior living and care space that don't necessarily have broad applicability beyond the walls of those communities. Others, where their initial foray into the market has been targeted more towards older adults who reside in some sort of senior living setting, that could then be scaled further out to the broader population, more to the older adult as consumer, beyond the senior living market. I certainly think there's significant upside there.
Yep. Yeah. So I think, and I do think that the other area that, as I talk to a lot of these vendor communities these entrepreneurs, is recognition that at least potentially the home care market, it represents a huge opportunity. I think in some sense, I don't know whether it's harder. You probably have a better feel on this. Do you think the home care market's easier to access, harder to access?
I think in a way it's a bit more difficult. So yes, it's significantly larger, depending on sort of how you're measuring it, but it's also very fragmented. There's a few larger players that people have heard of, But by and large, the vast majority of the market is still dominated by the mom and pops and smaller home health and home care providers. So yes, it's a bigger market in terms of lives served, but I think it's a tougher market to maybe get to because it is so fragmented.
So yesterday, just by happenstance, I talked to two emerging entrepreneurs, one in Europe and the other one on the East Coast. And one of them honestly has terrible technology. I don't see, they've got to rethink what they're doing. It just, there's coming to this problem that you solve. We got to that and there was no, it made sense. But the other one I thought was was pretty interesting. They're really challenged though, because they need a place to go test it out. And they're really struggling with that. And I mean, I know lots of people and I guess I could pick up the phone call, but that's sort of not what I do. It's not my business model. I just can't run my business and be the guy that these venture companies come to make those connections, right? So do you have any advice? But you sort of more deeply involved in that. How do they find places to get started to try this?
It all depends, where they're located. There are certainly some providers who are more willing to open their communities and expose their residents and their constituents, their employees to, I'll call it, emerging technology and serve as almost a test bed for the developers. We need to see more of that. Certainly you've got folks like Mike Hughes with United Church Homes, who has their EIR program where they invite entrepreneurs to come in and really spend time in their communities to learn the market from the inside out and from the bottom up. And that has proven, I think, to be quite illuminating for entrepreneurs, because inevitably what happens is either the problem you thought you were going to solve doesn't exist to the degree you thought, or if it is a problem that exists at scale, by engaging first with providers and customers to better understand how the problem is oriented for them and how your solution can solve that problem, you really need to spend, I would say, an equal amount of time understanding how to take that product to market. And we still see that as a massive outage for early stage companies. They are good at raising capital to invest in developing their widget. They don't put nearly enough capital to work either in pure market research, spending time understanding how to get that product in market and how they're going to scale. It's almost like, well, we'll fix it after we get an MVP out there into the marketplace itself. And that's just not a super efficient way to scale companies.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I want to dig a little deeper into this, but I do think you made a really good point that, sometimes you get into real life and you actually find that you've got a great product. It just solves a different problem than you thought it did. There are two companies in the marketplace today that have apps that help create videos, residents. And the original thinking was going to be that this would be used a little bit in marketing, but a lot just in life enrichment and family relationship. And what they primarily turned into is sales tools. And it wasn't until they actually got out in the marketplace and that's the way people were using it. And so, getting out there is super, super important. So I want to dig into this challenge that you and I were talking about last week. We see companies where they have this thing that they do, and we know what they do, they know what they do. But when you go to them and you say, what is the problem that you solve and what makes you better, you get this sort of glazed look. Thoughts on this, and how do you solve that problem?
Yeah, great question, Steve. And unfortunately, we see it more often than not. And even with companies that have, had some traction in the market, they've got, a growing annual recurring revenue. We are still seeing a fundamental lack of understanding about the market, the consumer, the dynamics of buying behavior, who should be at that buyer's table. Over the past 11 years investing in early stage companies, what we've come to realize is that we need to do a lot more work really bringing that buyer ecosystem together so that when we can help the entrepreneur really understand exactly what problem they're solving, how valuable it is, and help them understand what's the ROI case for the buyer, whoever the buyer is. And then of equal importance is helping them understand what are those hurdles or barrier to growth that they're going to encounter, who needs to be parties to the transaction and that buying decision, so that they really are able to be much more effective and efficient in how they start scaling out once they do expand into the market. And we've seen that with very early companies. We've seen that with businesses that have been around for years. And I think it goes back to not enough time spent up front in the very early stages of these businesses to, press pause and take the time to truly understand the dynamics of the buyers and how they want to consume.
Yeah, I think it's an important question. Just sort of as I've got somebody in my house helping. My dogs got excited. They unplugged my camera, which is why I have a little bit different view. I had to go to my laptop camera here, so that's why that's why I disappeared. My camera disappeared. I could actually hear you the whole time, but I'm not going to try to crawl under my desk now to put it back together. Anyway, Scott, I think that this is such an important time. I just wish more companies would do this, but it's really hard. I'm going to confess that even in my own organization, I'm not sure we have spent enough time actually asking that question of what problems do we solve? What makes us, I think we have a pretty good idea about what makes us unique. I'm not sure we have as good an idea about the big problems we solve. So I think it's really a fascinating question and something that everybody ought to be thinking about. I want to talk about AI a little bit. I was frankly surprised at how relatively little conversation there was about AI. There were some companies that talked about AI as being a part of their solution, but it seems like when I go to most straight senior living conferences, there are always the AI is sort of front and center, and I didn't feel like that was true here. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and hopefully I'm coming through. You're a little choppy on my end, and I don't know if it's me or you, but hopefully you can hear me all right. Right now, as it relates to AI in healthcare broadly and senior living and care more specifically, I think we're still in a massive hype cycle. I go to all different kinds of industry conferences, both inside senior living and then pure healthcare. And everybody seems to be wanting to jump on the bandwagon. I think it goes back to something we just talked about a minute ago, and I've spoken about this at a few different conferences, and it starts with understanding what problem you really want to solve with AI, as opposed to just jumping in with both feet. And it's not dissimilar to any other strategic initiative inside your organization. You want to know what problem it is that is of a high priority nature that artificial intelligence might have a role in addressing. And then I think the other thing that businesses would be smart to do is pull together a coalition from not just across the organization, so not just within the C-suite or the technology part of an organization, but truly all those folks, especially ones who are, in the field and on the front lines. And so not only across the breadth of an organization, but top to bottom throughout. Once you're able to do that and understand where the biggest pain points are that could be alleviated by artificial intelligence, then you, I think, would be wise to identify some subject matter experts who can serve as a guide to help you go through this process. Because all too often, there's a focus on the solution, but there are some really important fundamental components that need to be considered first. And that's really this idea of governance, risk, and control. How are you going to ensure that in your desire to solve a problem, you don't create more of them inadvertently? So really understanding that part of the whole strategy is extremely important. And the other thing I've seen, which is really interesting, when I ask providers, okay, so you want to use AI, tell me about your budget, and nobody seems to have a budget for it. So I'm not sure what else that I've seen people get this excited about, where there's not really a strategy or an understanding of the problem they want to solve and no money dedicated to it. So I believe it's time to take a step back, dig into the fundamentals, and really start with a problem first approach, because no doubt artificial intelligence is here to stay. It is going to create, I think, tremendous opportunity along with some risk and challenges. But especially as you start to look at the more mundane, repetitive, administrative back office tasks, I think there's obviously some very, very present applicability for artificial intelligence in those parts of these businesses.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the problem is that AI sort of feels free, right? I mean, ChatGPT, Claude, $20 a month each. I think the Gemini is the same thing, and so it sort of feels free. But the other part of it, I think, that makes it so challenging is you've got to just get in there and use it. I use AI virtually every day. But I find that as I use it, it actually takes me it's not as simple as writing a one-line prompt. Sometimes I'll write a paragraph or two prompts, and then I've got to circle back, and we've got to have I have this conversation with the machine, which is always a little bit weird, right, to get where I want. And so the end result should actually be better than what I can do for myself. But it takes time. It's not just a complete free saving of time.
Well, you just hit on something really important. And you as a journalist and a broadcaster, I think, are particularly adept at this, but it's called context chaining. As you're looking at prompting artificial intelligence, the better job you do up front of really engaging as though you were going to engage another person and really start explaining the why behind the questions you're asking and the information you're trying to get, you will typically get a much better result at the other end. But to your point, the one-liners don't usually work terribly well. It's not just an enhanced Google search engine.
That's right. Although it can actually do a pretty good job of that, right? Sometimes it makes it easier. And I know that there's some data that says that Google searches are way down because people are using AI, which has big implications in terms of their advertising revenue, right? So I think that's really, really important. So as you look forward, where do you see, and this sort of ties into your venture studio, but where do you see holes right now in the technology space and senior living in particular?
Yeah, I really see some incredible need where you see intersection in the healthcare space. So, transitions in care, I'm talking about just kind of pure healthcare for a second. Creating technology that allows for more seamless transfer of information between different provider types across the continuum, I think is going to be hugely important to help do a few different things. One, ensure a higher quality of care and outcome for the resident themselves. But two, as more and more providers are wanting to enter into at-risk relationships from a contracting standpoint, they have to have data. They have to understand how this information is going to impact them as operators in healthcare delivery vehicles and with their clinical programming. So I think this idea of being able to take data from multiple different sources, coalesce it into something that's usable, that delivers a tangible outcome and ROI case is going to be really important. We still think there's a lot of opportunity in the brain health dementia category. Guys like Jeff Zimmern from Posit Science have been around as real pioneers in the space, but we think there's still huge opportunity there. Resident engagement technology has gotten significantly better and more interesting over the last few years, but I think you'll continue to see that evolve. Health and wellness technology to really help increase not just lifespan, but health span, and do that for younger and younger cohorts, I think will be important. One that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, quite honestly, is in affordable housing, because it's a huge market. It's addressing a massive need in terms of our older adult population. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to use technology differently in that space for sure.
Yeah, I do think that technology has a lot of opportunity in the affordability to just, how do you figure out what are those things that you can do more efficiently? I look at things like, and there's some people who are playing with this, but it hits me right now as I'm caring for my stepfather is I would love to be able to have about an hour a day of a care aid, right? And that's not really a technology solution, but all I can buy is 4 hours.
Right.
And if I could pay $100 for an hour rather than 200 for 4 hours, everybody would win. And so I think there are a lot of solutions. The other thing you talked about is data. And what's interesting to me is I think the problem we actually have right now is, if anything, we have too much data, but it doesn't feel like people are really doing a very good job of tapping into that data to get, you can get you get these dashboards, but in terms of being able to be predictive or to use it to say, hey, these are the things you should work about, seems like a huge opportunity to me.
It's a huge opportunity. You hit the nail on the head. We've been aggregating healthcare data for 25 years, and we still haven't really used it in a way that is as prescriptive, proactive, predictive as it could be. Part of the issue is we don't have enough time, money, or people to throw at the problem. So this is another case where I think AI holds some really amazing promise in bringing these disparate sources of data, different formats together in a way that can quickly analyze it, identify where there's area of opportunity, regardless of what type of data you're talking about, and turn that insight into action.
Yeah, I have this dream that you have dump all this data in, and then you go to AI and you say, just tell me what I need to know out of this that I'm missing. And I think we can it's obviously going to take some prompting and it's going to have some frameworks, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to have it see things that we could just never see, that we wouldn't even know how to say, go look at this. You rely on the machine to do that. So we only got a few minutes left. I'd like to go a little deeper into your venture studio, what you're looking, how that works. Why would anybody, we've already got venture funds. Why would anybody do a venture studio? What makes it better special?
Yeah, thank you. It's just a different way to focus on building companies. And venture studios have been around since 2009, 2010. Historically, if you look at the data, they deliver significantly better outcomes than traditionally venture-backed companies. And it's because they start with a problem-first approach. They utilize a network of experts in a particular field to help them de-risk by co-building companies, getting them access to the market so that they can do that customer discovery work up front. Many of them are industry agnostic. There's a couple that are, I'd say, broadly healthcare focused. At Linkage Launch, we wanted to take that same concept, leverage our distribution network with Linkage Solutions as a network of organizations that can help us identify where the big problems are and help us prioritize those, work through the ideation, and then from there go into customer discovery and validation to see if there's really a there. Is there an addressable market? Is this a solution that addresses a problem that people will pay to have solved? And then from there, when we're working through this co-build process, we're also working on our go-to-market strategy and purposefully recruiting a founding team to help us take this business to market. The other thing that we're doing, I think, that's unique with Linkage Launch is we're trying to really break down those silos that inhibit true innovation in healthcare. So we're bringing not just post-acute, but acute care. We're bringing payers and also policymakers together at the front end of innovation so that we can identify problems that scale across all of healthcare that are facing older adults and the providers who serve them, and create businesses to address those in a different way. And by understanding from a public policy, a social determinant standpoint, it gives us a greater lens into these bigger, more macro problems that are out there that nobody's really addressing. So it's kind of like insiders building companies with insiders to address problems that most people aren't usually aware of.
Well, you said something that's so important. We could probably do another whole half hour on this, but we're going to do maybe 5 minutes on it because I think it's so important. I continue to believe that senior living has the ability to save the healthcare system in the United States, or the healthcare chaos in the United States system is probably not quite a very good. It's probably not all that accurate. The billions of dollars a year by reducing hospitalizations, providing post-acute care in a much better environment than a nursing home, but at a very fundamental level, and this is almost more human than it is technology, it doesn't seem like the hospital people know how to talk to senior living. Maybe more importantly, the senior living people don't seem to know how to talk to the hospital folks. And it seems like very rarely do they actually seem to sit at the table. Do you see solutions on that?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. It was those silos, those conversations that weren't taking place, and also understanding who really benefits from your solution. You look at hospital readmission. The hospital's not the one that really, in certain cases, is the one with the biggest problem. It's the payer. So how do you think differently about what your target market is, what value looks like to them, and how you begin solving problems that move the needle in their world? But I agree with you. We are working in a space of our economy that is the fastest growing demographic segment on the planet. And it's impacting every aspect of healthcare. And so for me, I think it's important for us to be leading these conversations, because it's a segment of the population that other parts of the healthcare ecosystem don't take nearly the time to understand at the real, fundamental level, and figure out like how senior living can be a partner to alleviate big problems that they are having. We, with Linkage Launch, we want to have those conversations and build those solutions together.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here and thinking, man, we ought to figure out how to do this little mini conference where we get maybe 6 or 8 hospital executives and 6 or 8 senior living people who are really creative and interested in finding new solutions. And obviously, you have to have a little bit of an agenda, but then you mostly just sit down and have conversations about what are your big problems and how can we help each other make the world a better place for our systems and for the older people and the residents and that kind of thing. So,
Steve, I think that's a brilliant idea, and I would add some payers, and I would also add policy experts, because they can really help give you insight into where the puck is going as you start thinking about what problems you want to prioritize for solutions.
And of course, the payer part is so important, and of course, it's all big mess right now because of what's happening in DC. But it is. It's not going to be as big. It's not going to be as good as the people who love what's going on and think it is, and it's not going to be as big a disaster as the people who hate going on is, because it's messy, but it'll be something that sort of works, right?
Yeah.
So.
Sure.
Scott, if somebody's interested in the venture studio, you're still looking to you're raising some capital for that. You're also looking at problems to solve. Just talk a little bit about how people might get involved in that with you.
Yeah, just please reach out to me. Through LinkedIn is great. You can go to linkagelaunch.com or linkagegroup.com. But yeah, please reach out. It's something we're incredibly passionate about. We think we have an opportunity to partner with providers, policymakers, payers, and other participants with broadly in healthcare, and really turn this into a collaborative effort. So if you're interested in figuring out what comes next, you want to talk about problems that you've seen that nobody's addressing, by all means, please reach out. I'd love to have a conversation.
Cool. Scott, thank you very much. Have a great holiday week. Appreciate your passion for the industry and technology. Appreciate your friendship. Jada, thank you so much for running things behind scenes, particularly when, we don't notice you until things go wrong, and then you help solve those problems. And so I appreciate you. And Scott, hang on for just a minute. And with that, we hope you have a great rest of your week.